So today, we're diving into one of the most iconic worlds in all of gaming. But we're not going to talk about which gun is best or where to find all the bobbleheads. Nope. For this explainer, we're going to look at the world of Fallout as something totally different. A museum. A huge, sprawling, and honestly pretty brutal museum of American history and the ideals that, well, led to its fiery end. You know, this series' famous opening line, it's so much more than just a cool catchphrase, right? It's really the whole mission statement. It's asking us to look at these ruins of the future, not as some crazy science fiction, but as a direct and maybe unavoidable consequence of our own past. And this visual really just says it all. It's the core tension of the entire series, right here. On one side, you have that boundless, shiny optimism of 1950s America, the dream of a perfect suburban life. And on the other side, you get the grim reality of what that world actually produced, a complete and total nuclear horror show. The entire world of Fallout lives in that jarring, super uncomfortable space right between the promise and the failure. All right, so here's our game plan for this little tour. We'll kick things off by unpacking that wild post-nuclear 1950s dream. Then we'll get into our main idea, the wasteland as a museum. After that, we'll visit two specific exhibits, the politics of trying to rebuild and how history gets told through satire. And finally, we'll exit through the gift shop and think about the lessons we were supposed to have learned. Okay, let's jump right into this first section, because to really get what Fallout is critiquing, you first have to understand its incredibly unique and deeply ironic vibe. The key concept here is something called retrofuturism. This isn't just the future. It's a very specific kind of future. It's the future as imagined from the perspective of, say, mid-20th century America. It's what people in the 1950s thought the 21st century would be like. So you get this wild mix of their cultural values and aesthetics, but with flying cars, laser guns, and robot butlers. And what's so brilliant about this is how it captures the central paradox of that whole atomic age. I mean, it was an era of incredible optimism. People were dreaming of nuclear-powered cars and limitless energy. But at the exact same time, there was this deep, gnawing dread. You had cereal brands like Sugar Bombs making jokes about atomic power, while little kids were in school practicing how to duck and cover to survive a nuclear blast. Fallout just cranks that contradiction up to 11, showing a society that was dreaming of a perfect utopia while sleepwalking straight into the apocalypse. So, how are we supposed to make sense of a world like this? Well, that brings us to our main argument. The wasteland isn't just a backdrop for the action, it's a carefully curated critique. Some of the academic analysis of the series really leans into this idea that we should treat the entire game world like a museum. Every single ruined building, every forgotten computer terminal, every quirky little town in the Mojave, they're all exhibits. And the central theme of this museum is a hard look at the American ideals that led to the Great War in the first place. Now, this museum doesn't just use plaques on the wall. It tells its story in a few really clever ways. First, there's environmental storytelling. You're the detective, piecing together what happened from the skeletons and notes left behind. Second, you have the actual in-game museums, which are always pushing this super biased, nationalistic version of history. And third, and maybe most importantly, you have the factions, the groups of survivors who are basically walking, talking satires of old-world ideas. Okay, so let's check out our first exhibit. We're heading to the Mojave Wasteland from Fallout New Vegas to look at two big groups trying to rebuild the world and how each one is basically trying to resurrect a failed American ideal. So on one side, you've got the New California Republic, the NCR. Their sales pitch is pure Americana, democracy, liberty, all that good stuff. But the reality, it's a bloated, imperialistic government run by a rich elite, the Brahmin barons, who control everything. Then on the other side, you've got Mr. House, the ruler of New Vegas. He promises stability and prosperity through pure, cold logic and tech. The reality of that? It's a dictatorship where freedom doesn't matter and your only value is what you contribute to the system. You see, both are trying to bring back the old world, and both are completely doomed to repeat its biggest mistakes. And here's the crucial takeaway. As one political analysis puts it, the NCR struggle is basically a mirror of our own. It's that classic problem of a democracy that has all the right words on paper, but in reality ends up serving the interests of the rich and powerful. The game isn't just making up fantasy factions for us to shoot at, it's using them to hold a mirror up to real-world politics. All right, time for our second exhibit. We're staying in the Mojave to look at one of the most brilliant and, frankly, biting pieces of satire in the whole series. It's a group that tells us a ton about how Fallout views a very specific generation. So say hello to the Boomers. They are a reclusive, isolationist, and extremely well-armed faction holed up at Nellis Air Force Base. And to really understand them, you have to visit their museum, which is basically just this one giant mural that tells their entire life story. If you look closely, it's a story of struggle, of being alone, and of course, a whole lot of explosions. It's the perfect example of a community writing its own glorious self-serving history. So let's break down this satire, okay? Their story kicks off in Vault 34, a social experiment, where the dwellers were given a massive armory and not much else. So surprise, surprise, they developed a culture obsessed with guns. Now they live in their own fortified town, launching artillery at literally anyone who gets close. They worship old-world tech, like the B-29 bomber they're trying to fish out of a lake. And the historical parallel here is just so potent. Their self-imposed exile into this uniform, heavily defended community is a direct commentary on the white flight to the suburbs during the Cold War, retreating from the world's problems to create a bubble of your own. So as our tour of this wasteland museum comes to an end, it's time to think about the big picture. What is the actual point of preserving all this failure? The main argument of Fallout as a historical critique is that it totally rejects the idea that humanity is always on some straight line towards getting better. Fallout's world screams the exact opposite. It shows us that progress can be wiped out in a single afternoon and that the mistakes of the past will always come back to haunt you if you don't learn from them. Which brings us to the big final question. If war never changes and every attempt to rebuild the world seems to fail in the same old ways, what are we supposed to take away from all this? Is it all just hopeless? Well, not exactly. The ultimate lesson of the Fallout Museum seems to be this: history is a tool, not a blueprint. The failures of the NCR, of Mr. House, of the Boomers, they all come from trying to perfectly copy-paste a broken past. What the game seems to be suggesting is that the only real way forward is to understand that past, to learn from its absolute worst mistakes, and then finally, to have the courage to build something completely new.